Good morning. It's Monday, January 19th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 835 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back to the FTD Morning Brief and wishing everyone a meaningful Martin Luther King Day. The violent repression of protests continues inside Iran following President Donald Trump's decision to hold off on striking the regime. The clerics appear to have tightened their stranglehold on the people. The death toll keeps climbing. Even with the complete lockdown on internet and phone lines, news is trickling out of the country, with some reports placing the death toll at around 16,500. Zero noise from the social justice warriors. And now the regime is reportedly charging enormous sums for families to reclaim the bodies of their loved ones. A cyber attack yesterday hijacked the airwaves of the regime, broadcasting messages from the exiled crown prince. That was a welcome sight to behold, something out of a movie. But the status quo remains bleak, folks. I can't sugarcoat it. We're all still watching to see if Donald Trump changes course. Meanwhile, we've reached phase 2 of President Donald Trump's 20-point Gaza plan. Phase 1 hasn't exactly been completed, but the goal is apparently not to let the perfect get in the way of the good. Given the high stakes involved, from the reconstruction of Gaza to normalization in the Middle East and the urgent need to halt the bloodshed, I understand the logic of moving forward. But here's what I don't get. What the hell are Turkey and Qatar doing on the board of peace, the body charged with building a better future in Gaza, a Gaza that precludes Hamas? Look, there's some terrific people on that board, but Turkey and Qatar are unabashed patrons of Hamas. Together, along with the Islamic Republic of Iran, these two countries have funded, armed, and trained Hamas. These two state sponsors of terrorism have as much being on the board of peace as Hamas leader Khalil al-Hayya has being a member of Knesset. But it doesn't end there. The Turks support the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, the Muslim Brotherhood, and they launder money for the Iranian regime. Ditto for the dirtbags in Qatar, who also back the Taliban. There are precisely zero reasons for these two countries to have a stake in post-war Gaza. We're rewarding bad behavior. If Qatar and Turkey remain inside the tent, I have 3 predictions: more war, more misery, and more mayhem. Buckle up, because with Qatar and Turkey, a slow-motion train wreck is almost certainly coming. All right, let's talk about the other news, because there was a whole bunch of it. Huge story out of Syria where the al-Shara regime, the al-Jolani regime, the former al-Qaeda, now who knows what regime, clashed with the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF. They agreed to a ceasefire after escalating clashes in the north of the country. The Kurds have reportedly surrendered, granting the regime more control of the country as well as its oil resources. This might be construed by some as good news, because we're watching the consolidation of power in a country that's been racked by civil war since 2011. But now get this, the regime is letting Islamic State prisoners out of jail previously under Kurdish control. So yes, I fear for what comes next, and I fear for the minorities in Syria, especially the Kurds, given how much Turkey controls Syria and how much the Turks have it out for the Kurds. A security incident was reported last night on the border between Israel and Lebanon. Apparently, somebody drew too close to the border with Israel. The Israelis responded and opened fire, and then the suspect withdrew. There were other Israeli ops inside Lebanon over the weekend. Airstrikes were told. It's all a reminder, once again, that things remain tense on Israel's northern border. Swiss telecom providers Swisscom and Sunrise just removed Al Jazeera from their platforms. They were apparently concerned, justifiably, that the Qatari television network was just blasting out Hamas propaganda. Credit where it's due. You won't hear me praising Switzerland too often on this program. But way to go, fellas. Oh, and nice chocolates, cheese, and watches you got there. Also, my family wants their art back. Okay. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney touched down in Qatar yesterday with the goal of strengthening ties between Ottawa and the dirtbag terror-funding regime in Doha. I might have just thrown up a little bit in my mouth, folks. A vomit, if you will. It's nauseating. Once a bastion of traditionally liberal values, Canada is just drifting in the wrong direction, and the stench, I just can't handle it. It apparently doesn't matter who's head of state up there. And finally, in case you've been living under a rock, the United States and its NATO allies in Europe are at each other's throats at the moment over the fate of Greenland. And let me just say this here. I get why Trump wants the territory. It's going to be of increasing importance when it comes to missile defense, rare earth mineral extraction, Arctic dominance, you name it. And I think the president is right to doubt that Denmark is a powerful or strategic enough ally to properly wield its influence in Greenland. But I don't like the threatening of peaceful nations. And I don't like open rifts between our allies. Let's fix that, huh? Here's hoping we can find a better path forward. All right, it's time to bring on my guest. He's a friend. He's an overly optimistic New York Giants fan. He's a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. He's the author of several books, including some that sit on this bookshelf right behind me. He's also a repeat offender on this program. That's right, ladies and germs. It's time to bring on CFR Stephen Cook. Few know the region the way that Stephen does, and few have his snarkiness. So let's do this. Let's bring him onto the show. Welcome to the FDD Morning Brief. Abu T, also known as Stephen Cook.
Good morning. How are you?
Oh, living the dream.
I'm glad you mentioned the Giants. Help is on the way.
Yeah, you're delusional, but okay. Let's move on to something that we actually can assess. What the hell happened last week in Iran? And I guess more to the point, is this still an open question? Is it still a pivotal moment in American foreign policy? You wrote about this, not surprisingly, in a recent piece. Has anything changed in your mind over the weekend that gives you more optimism that things might change for the better?
I'm not sure I'm optimistic, but I don't think this moment is over. If you remember, and of course, history can't tell us exactly what's going to happen, but it can inform us. The Iranian Revolution of 1978, 1979 unfolded across 15 months. So it may very well be that we're at the beginning of an actual social uprising revolution that could overthrow this regime. But what's happening is, and let me take you back to graduate school for a moment. You've got protesters in the streets, and they are trying to demonstrate to fence sitters, both within the regime and outside the regime, that the costs of being in the street are not as high as those fence sitters believe it to be. The regime's response is, we need to demonstrate to the large number of fence sitters that the costs are actually really, really high. And that's where you get the regime using heavy weapons to kill large numbers of people. I think the fact that the regime is acknowledging 2,000 deaths would suggest it's probably in the neighborhood of what you were saying in your intro, closer to 16 or maybe even larger in terms of number of deaths. There are eyewitness accounts of non-Iranian, Afghan, Arab militias using large caliber machine guns on protests in the streets of Iranian cities. So I think this death toll is going to be very, very high. I think in terms of what the United States is doing, the president seemed to back off, which was curious for people. But you never know with this president. You know, remember in the lead up to Operation Midnight Hammer, in Washington, as you well know, the betting was he's not going to do it. He wants to negotiate. He wants to negotiate. He wants to negotiate. And then he went ahead and did it. We know that last week the United States didn't have the military assets in the region in order to undertake a strike against Iran. There was no aircraft carrier battle group there, although there was lots of air assets. You need that carrier battle group to protect the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Israelis, and others. Soon we'll have that kind of firepower in the region. So with President Trump, never say never. Take him at his word. I think what's really important here, though, is that finally, Washington is throwing its full-throated support behind protesters. These ideas about Iran wanting a better relationship with the United States, that it was susceptible to American diplomacy and financial incentive and so on and so forth. Hopefully that's all been stripped away. And all the people in Washington who've been telling us those things for 20 years are interestingly quite quiet in the last couple of weeks. So
and
hopefully we will.
I'm enjoying that quiet because this has just been insufferable for decades, right? But I will say that fog of Trump is, I think it's hard to read. Nobody knows what's going on here.
What he's going to do.
Our foreign policy is essentially susceptible to shifts on a tweet. And that does, that raises the anxiety factor for sure. But I mean, look, I like the messaging. I don't know if I love the pause, but you know what? Let's wait and see. I think you're right. The moment's not over. But let me ask you about
definitely not over.
Definitely not over. All right. Let me ask you about, I think, what is arguably the big news over the weekend, even as we wait during this pregnant pause over Iran. And that's what just happened in the Syrian regime. between the regime and the Kurds, the SDF. This is like a prelude to civil war. On the one hand, it's also a consolidation of power. It's also the prelude to a resurgence of the Islamic State, as I tried to kind of lay out. How do you read what's going on right now, and kind of what happens next?
This would have been the biggest story of the last week or so had Iran not been had melting down. This began actually before the weekend when Syrian government forces, backed by Turkish militias and the Turkish military, went after Syrian Democratic Forces, America's ally in the fight against the Islamic State, in neighborhoods of Aleppo, where there wasn't a lot of SDF. So what they did was they just killed Kurdish civilians in these two neighborhoods. That crisis seemed to beget a larger military operation that is being planned by the Syrian government with the Turkish military to attack the SDF and take over that area of Syria that the SDF controls. Sometime over the weekend, I can't remember whether it was Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, this agreement emerged in which the Syrian Democratic Forces leader, General Muslim, agreed to to basically all of the demands of the regime and the Turks. He must have been under tremendous military pressure in order to agree to that. But as you pointed out, this may have been just a tactic on the part of Mazloum to relieve the pressure so he can regroup. In the meantime, ISIS guys are being let out of prison. These regime forces, ISIS guys are pulling down statues of women Kurdish fighters who fought the Islamic State in Kobani, and just chaos reigns. And this is what the regime, the Turks, and what U.S. policy has wrought.
Yeah, and let's let's acknowledge here the United States has removed sanctions on the regime. The president's met with Ahmed al-Shara. The goal has been to promote stability in the region, with the idea that they're going to be responsible stakeholders and that the Turks were going to help guarantee that there would be stability in the region. What I think we're looking at right now is a Turkish ulterior motive. We know they have it out for the SDF. They have it out for Kurdish militia. 100%. They're trying to destroy that. The regime wants control of oil and therefore revenue in the northern part of the country. They want to consolidate, but at the expense of the rights of minorities and at the expense of broader regional stability, because we've just seen the release of thousands of ISIS prisoners.
And I don't think the Kurds are going to give it up so quickly.
No,
I mean, I know Mazloum signed that agreement, but he himself has said the fight is not over.
Wait for round two. And by the way, as I've been telling our listeners and our viewers, the Kurds make up 30 plus, maybe even 40 million people in the region. They stretch across the countries of Turkey and Syria and Iran and Iraq, by the way, as well. And these are, all countries that are not exactly aligned with the United States or with Israel. I can imagine the Israelis galvanizing some support, giving them training. Who knows? But we could be now watching kind of a remaking of the map, if you will, in the region as the pressure comes down on the Kurds in Syria. I think a significant event. We're going to continue to watch that. But sticking on the theme of Turkey, the key ally here of the regime in Syria, also a key ally of Hamas. They show up. Hakan Fidan, formerly the head of MIT, the Turkish intelligence services, the guy that installed Hamas inside of Gaza or actually helped them build up in Gaza, the guy that installed a external headquarters in Turkey for Hamas, the guy that helped launder billions of dollars for the Iranian regime, the guy that helped ISIS grow and build inside Syria. I mean, this guy is a dirtbag. What is he doing on the board of peace?
Look, and this is connected to the previous topic with Syria. The Trump administration, particularly in the form of U.S. Ambassador to Turkey Tom Barak, has basically taken up the Turkish cause in Washington. And the Turks have been portrayed as being uniquely constructive in Syria. That's clearly what the administration's policy has been, is let's let the Saudis and the Turks and the Syrians work it out in Syria. Let's restrain the Israelis and let, these three other countries, the Syrian regime and Turkey and Syria, because there is this belief, and the president really likes President Erdogan, believes that they can be constructive. And they've said, look, there wouldn't be a ceasefire in Gaza, there wouldn't be a hostage release if it had not been for Erdogan. But there might not have been a conflict anyway had the Turks not allowed Hamas to use its financial system to run operations against Israel, had not supported them rhetorically, materially. The fact that the Turks are on this board of peace is extraordinarily odd given the role that they're playing. But where Barak and, is that how you pronounce it? Barak, where Barak and President Trump sit, you can't have this ceasefire without the Turks. What is so crazy to me is, remember, in the summer of 2023, there was a rapprochement between Israel and Turkey. And then Hamas's attack on Israel 2 months later. The Turks had a choice. They could use their good offices with Hamas and Israel and try to be constructive through this long, terrible conflict, or they can fan the flames of this war, and they chose to fan the flames of the war.
Yeah.
And
by the way,
they're involved in their policy is to ensure the survival of Hamas.
Yeah, that is clear. And by the way, that's the same, if you ask me, for the Qataris, who are also on this
100%.
Piece. And, the Qataris could have used their offices to try to, essentially bring about the end of the war, get the hostages home. It only happened because the Israelis struck in Doha back in September. And that was the moment that the Qataris said, okay, we're done.
Right.
The Turks, I think they're just following the lead of their primary financial patrons in Doha, but neither one of these people should be on the board. Now, I want to ask you about Turkey more broadly, because we're watching the influence of Turkey in Syria, but we're also watching it obviously in Gaza. I've seen a little bit here and there about Turkish support to Hezbollah, threats to have greater influence in Lebanon. Tell us a little bit about let's call it the Neo-Ottoman ambitions, the Neo-Ottoman strategy of the Erdogan government at this moment where the other regional power is losing steam. And it looks like whatever the Iranians are losing, it looks like the Turks are trying to gobble this up and to emerge stronger. Am I wrong here?
No, I don't think you're wrong. I think, Erdogan has long seen Turkey as a great power in the Muslim world, and in particular in the Arab world. He has built influence in Syria, in Gaza. You're quite right. I mean, you talk to the Lebanese and they see the Turks kind of moving in. And when money was being moved through Turkey, Turkish nationals were being apprehended at the airport in Beirut with large sums of money destined for Hezbollah. Don't tell me the Turks don't know about that kind of thing. They're also involved in the Horn of Africa. They are a primary patron of the Somali government. The Turks are freaking out about Israel's recognition of Somaliland.
Pass the popcorn.
Pass the popcorn. And of course, there's obviously, as you point out, their close connections to the Qataris. This is a moment for the Turks. And then you have, because the Saudis are upset with the Emiratis and the Israelis over a variety of issues, the Saudis moving closer to the Turks. The Turks are now talking about joining the Saudi-Pakistani security pact.
Right.
Which is a long-standing, actually, Turkish Islamist position that there should be a Muslim NATO.
A Sunni defense alliance.
A Muslim NATO. So the Turks, and of course, much of this is being enabled by American policy in the region, which has said, Turkey is uniquely influential. We love the Turks. The president likes Erdogan. Look at what they can do in Gaza. Look at what they can do in Syria. We want the Turks in these places. We're downplaying the sort of malevolent aspects of Turkish foreign policy.
And there's a lot of that, and we're going to keep tracking it. All right. You mentioned the this rift between the Saudis and the Emiratis. I want to talk about this. I don't think enough people are talking about it. This is kind of like the show, heated rivalry, except without the hockey and the love plot. Okay, it's not at all like the show, but it is a heated rivalry right now. And this is not what we thought it was from even a few years ago. I mean, we always talked about this as sort of a cousin-like relationship, a brotherly relationship. And now you've got the two strongest, most wealthy Gulf Arab states that seem to be at each other's throats right now. So what's going on?
Well, look, because most people in Washington only started doing the Middle East like yesterday or 3 days ago, present company excluded, people don't remember that the Emirati-Saudi relationship, more than 15 years ago, was characterized by general bitchiness and snipery. And so this may be a return to the status quo ante, but the stakes are higher now given the changes in the region. The Emiratis, like other small countries in the region, don't want to be dominated by the Saudis. And the Saudis are like, hey, we're the big dog. You got to do what you want to do. And clearly, the Emiratis and the Saudis have a different perspective and different interests in Yemen, for example. The Emiratis don't have a problem with two Yemens. So South Yemen, that's a satellite of the United Arab Emirates, is a security win for the Emiratis. It's actually a security win for the Saudis, but they can't see the forest for the trees.
But it's not theirs, so they can't own it.
Same thing about Somaliland, which is another point of friction between the two of them. You say to the Saudis, hey, look at what Somaliland does for you in terms of the Houthis and the IRGC and the Red Sea. And they're like, yeah, but the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Arab states. I'm like, Somalia? Are you kidding me? They can't see the forest.
It's an acronym.
They're on opposite ends. So there is this friction. And
it's an acronym, though. I mean, right? The NIH. Not invented here, right? The NIH problem is real with the Saudis, right? Even when the Emiratis do things that are in their interest, they appear to be opposed to them only because it was not invented in Saudi.
That's exactly right. And I think if you look at the arc of these problems, a lot of it is because the Saudis weren't out in front or that the Emiratis didn't give the Saudis credit for it. And it goes back to even, kind of smaller issues in the region, negotiating with Putin over Ukrainian children or hostages and all kinds of stuff. The Saudis have wanted to be in the lead in certain moments when the Emiratis have been in the lead. And it's deteriorated into this rivalry that's happening. And the Saudis are deeply resentful of the relationship that the Emiratis have developed with the Israelis. And they believe that it is undermining regional stability, which they're now betting $1 trillion on Saudi Arabia. They want the region to be stable. Like I said, they can't see the forest from the trees.
Yeah, they can't. I got to say, this fight seems like a little ridiculous, but very serious. I mean, deadly serious, right? When you think about the impact that it might have around the region, where they have every reason to work together, and yet they won't. And when they don't, other people are going to feel the reverberations of that instability.
I think that's right.
One last thing before I let you go. You've been very generous with your time on a holiday. Normalization between Saudi and Israel, right? We've talked about this rivalry between the Emirates and the Saudis. The Saudis are doing whatever the Emirates don't do. That means if the Emirates are all in on peace with Israel and they appear to be very comfortable with the relationship that they have with the Israelis and supporting Israeli foreign policy, does this mean that the Saudis are just going to go in 180 degrees in the other direction? Or is there a chance that the Saudis also gravitate there under their own terms?
Well, the Saudis, in recent conversations did not dismiss the idea of resuming talks on normalization down the road. I think a lot will be dependent upon what happens in the Gaza Strip. I think some will be dependent upon what happens in the Israeli elections. But they've said that they're clear. There has to be they didn't say there has to be a Palestinian state, but there has to be progress on Gaza and the Palestinians in order for there to be normalization. They did not dismiss it, though. They have been, they're angry about what the Israelis have done that they perceive to be destabilizing, hitting Doha, Somaliland. They sense a Israeli Emirati thing going on in Yemen, etc. But it was interesting to me that they have not outright dismissed normalization. Actually, I found them a bit softer on normalization than they had been in previous encounters with the Saudis.
Yeah, I'm getting that vibe too. But then again, I do think that Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, is still committed to the idea. Normalization, I always say, is a process, not an event. The process is already ongoing, and I don't think there's any rolling it back. I think the question is just at what point did they come out of the shadows and actually hold hands in public? That's kind of the big question as far as I'm concerned. And I don't think that any of that happens without some semblance of stability in Gaza, which is why we need to get to phase 2. But phase 2 is encumbered by the fact that the Turks and the Qataris are in the tent. So anyway, we're bringing it all full circle. It's all about as clear as Turkish coffee. We're going to leave it there. Thank you, Stephen Cook, for joining us today. No, sorry, New York Giants. We all know
help is on the way, baby.
You just keep holding out hope, and we'll just keep patting you on the head and telling you that it's going to be okay. All right, thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
All right, always good to catch up with that guy. He knows a lot about the Middle East. All right, folks, I'm done with you. Okay, fine. Not you, just the episode. But this is the part where I tell you to please read our website and to please check out all the great new content on our socials. And please don't forget that contributions to FTD are tax deductible. So you know what to do. Please head on over to ftd.org/invest to learn more. Tune in Wednesday for another can't miss, gripping, grab you by the lapels episode of the FTD Morning Brief. Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FTD.